All right, let's jump into another deep dive. We're going to be exploring Native American history, and we're going to be taking excerpts from First Americans, a history of Native peoples.
Okay, yeah.
And what I found so interesting about this particular book is it kind of turns a lot of the familiar narratives on their head. It really dives into the diversity of all the different Native American tribes and, really focuses on the lives of ordinary individuals and the impact of geography and how, the shifting power dynamics that were always at play.
Yeah, one of the things that the book really emphasizes is the way that the environment and Native Americans were constantly shaping each other.
Right.
It's not just the people, it's also the mountains, rivers, and plains that influenced their culture and how they made decisions and dealt with change.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how we kind of take the landscape for granted,
Yep.
Like we just see it as something that's always there. But, for Native Americans, it was really a living, breathing part of their lives.
Yeah.
But let's rewind way back before Columbus even set foot in the Americas.
Yeah.
One of the things that I found just mind-blowing was this whole theory about a possible coastal route to the Americas.
Right, and this is where the Monteverde site in Chile is so important.
Yeah.
It dates back over 12,500 years,
Right.
which, if that's true, really challenges the old idea that people only came over from Siberia through that ice-free corridor.
Right. It's like completely flips the script on how we thought people first got here.
Totally.
It's like imagine, ancient explorers hopping down the coast in boats, maybe even boats made of animal skins.
Right.
It's incredible to think about.
It's amazing. And then there's the possible connection to Southeast Asia.
Oh, yeah, that blew my mind.
Yeah, with genetic links between Amazonian tribes and indigenous peoples all the way over in Australia and New Guinea.
It makes you realize that, human history is so much more complex and interconnected than we often give it credit for.
Yeah, it really shows how much we're still learning and how many mysteries are still out there.
Exactly. And speaking of complexity, let's talk about the Taino people in the West Indies. Columbus kind of painted this picture of them as like simple and peaceful.
Right.
But this book really dives way deeper than that.
Yeah, I mean, Columbus's view was pretty simplistic.
Right.
But the book reveals that the Taino actually had a much more sophisticated society than he ever gave them credit for.
Yeah.
They had a structured political system with chiefs, and they even had female rulers like Queen Higuanama.
And their religious beliefs were pretty intense too, right?
Oh, yeah. Very intricate, revolving around deities called zamis.
Right, those spirits.
Yeah, these objects are representations of the spirits.
So much for that noble savage stereotype.
Right.
These were not simple societies.
No, not at
There was a lot of, political maneuvering going on and a really complex trade network.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The trade in the Eastern Woodlands was incredibly active.
It's hard to even fathom, the distances of the goods they were trading.
Yeah, imagine copper from the Great Lakes region being traded for shells from the Atlantic coast, or soapstone from the Appalachian Mountains.
It's like, wow, that level of interconnection over such vast distances.
Yeah, it shows just how connected these groups were, even over huge distances.
Yeah, it really paints a different picture of pre-Columbian America.
Totally.
But, as we know, when the Europeans showed up, everything changed.
Yeah, it's like a whole new chapter slammed open.
Yeah.
And the book doesn't shy away from the devastating impact of diseases like smallpox.
Right, that had to have been just horrific to experience.
It's hard to even grasp the scale of the devastation, Smallpox spread so rapidly that it decimated entire communities before they even had direct contact with Europeans.
It's just unimaginable.
Imagine facing a threat you don't understand and have no defense against.
And then even how Europeans view the Taino people went through a shift, right?
Yeah, it's interesting.
At first, it was all about this peaceful and pure image.
Right.
But then as they started to learn more, a more nuanced picture of their political and social systems started to emerge.
Think about someone like Bartolomé de las Casas.
Yeah.
He was able to provide a much more detailed account of the Taino people.
Right. He actually took the time to understand their culture.
Yeah, he wrote about their chiefs, their hereditary rulers, and their complex religious practices.
So it wasn't just this one-dimensional view anymore.
No, his writings really challenged those oversimplified views that were floating around.
It's so important to get those more accurate perspectives, but unfortunately in the Maya region, things took a really dark turn with the Spanish Inquisition.
Yeah, that's a chilling chapter in history.
It's hard to even read about.
Imagine the terror as Fray Pedro de Ciudad Rodrigo used torture methods like the garrucha.
Yeah, that's just brutal.
Basically, it was a hoist used to suspend and inflict pain on anyone suspected of heresy.
It just shows how cultural clashes and attempts at religious conversion could have such brutal consequences.
Absolutely, it's a stark example of that.
And it wasn't just the Inquisition.
Right.
There was also that repartimiento system in Spanish Florida.
Yeah, basically a system of forced labor.
Yeah, they forced native people to build roads, harvest crops.
Serve in the militia.
It just tore apart their social structures and their way of life.
The repartimiento system was all about exploiting native labor, you know?
Yeah.
It really disrupted the balance of their lives.
And created resentment.
Yeah, and it caused immense resentment.
And it's not surprising that it led to resistance.
Oh, absolutely.
Like the Temuco Rebellion led by Lucas Menendez.
Yeah, that was a direct pushback against the Spanish.
A sign that they weren't going to just take it lying down.
Exactly. They weren't going to just submit quietly.
And then there's Francisco Vázquez de Coronado and his expedition to find the mythical 7 cities of gold. His search for Cibola really marked the beginning of Spanish conquest in the Pueblo world.
Coronado's expedition was a turning point.
Yeah.
It really ramped up the Spanish presence in the Southwest and gradually chipped away at Pueblo autonomy.
It's like those quests for riches often had far-reaching consequences for the people who were already there.
Right, exactly.
And it triggered this ripple effect, too.
Yeah.
The arrival of the Spanish really disrupted this long-standing trade between the Apaches and the Pueblos. And because of that, the Apaches started raiding for slaves more frequently.
Right. It's a tragic example of how an outside force can really destabilize things.
Yeah, completely upend the balance of power.
The Apaches were adapting to survive in a changing world, you know.
Right.
The Spanish arrival, along with the introduction of horses.
Oh, yeah, that changed everything.
Yeah, shifted the power dynamics on the plains.
And speaking of power shifts, you have the Comanches.
Right.
Who were known for their skill on horseback.
Oh, yeah.
They saw an opportunity in all this chaos.
And they took it.
And ended up becoming a major force in the region.
They were incredibly adept at using the horse to their advantage.
Oh.
You know, they exploited the disruption caused by Spanish conquest to expand their territory and their influence.
It's fascinating how a group can rise to prominence like that in the midst of all this upheaval.
Yeah, they seized the moment.
And then, of course, you have the early English settlers in Jamestown.
Yeah.
And their relationship with the Powhatan Confederacy.
Oh, that's a whole other story.
It was a roller coaster.
It was a wild ride.
Of misunderstandings, suspicion, and ultimately conflict.
It's easy to romanticize Pocahontas's role as a go-between, you know?
Oh, yeah. She's become this iconic figure.
But the truth is much more complex.
Yeah.
I mean, the starvation in Jamestown, for example.
Right. They were desperate.
It made the English desperate and more likely to resort to aggression.
So we have to understand the context behind those early interactions.
Absolutely.
And then the capture of Popac-Incano.
Right. A key Powhatan leader.
Really escalated things.
Oh, yeah. It was a turning point.
It just goes to show how one event can have such a huge impact on the course of history.
Popac-Incano's capture really deepened the divide between the English and the Powhatan.
Yeah, made peaceful coexistence much harder.
It highlights how individual actions can have unintended but far-reaching consequences.
So you have all this tension brewing, and then in New England, the praying town model emerges.
Right.
This attempt to convert Native Americans to Christianity and try to integrate them into colonial society.
Think about John Eliot.
Yeah, the Puritan minister.
Yeah, he was passionate about converting Native Americans.
He really believed it was crucial for their salvation.
Yeah, and the success of the Puritan mission in the New World.
But it also kind of shows how European views often failed to recognize the validity of existing Native American beliefs.
Right, they just couldn't see it.
They couldn't grasp that these people already had their own spiritual traditions.
Exactly.
And this whole movement, it created new alliances and rivalries.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like the Mohegans and the Narragansetts.
You're right, they got caught in the middle.
With the English kind of pitting them against each other.
The English had a habit of playing divide and conquer.
It's like a classic tactic.
Yeah, they would often even unintentionally fuel these conflicts by favoring one tribe over another.
It just shows how European involvement could reshape those existing power dynamics.
And sometimes with devastating consequences.
Yeah, it's not a pretty picture.
Not at all.
And then there's the Five Nations Ascendancy War.
Oh, that was brutal.
Just brutal. They essentially wiped out entire Huron villages.
Yeah, it changed the power structure in the Great Lakes region.
Completely reshaped the map.
It was a systematic and brutal campaign.
It's hard to imagine the impact on the Huron.
Seeing their villages destroyed, their people displaced.
Yeah, a whole way of life just gone.
It reshaped the entire political landscape of the region.
But even amidst all this chaos, there were still some pockets of cultural exchange happening.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
The book talks about the middle ground and the Pays d'Anneau.
Okay.
This region that encompassed parts of the Great Lakes and the upper Mississippi Valley. And in this area, the French Jesuits actually tried to adapt their version of Christianity to fit the local context.
It's a really interesting example of how cultural exchange could sometimes lead to compromise.
Yeah, a little bit of give and take.
Instead of forcing a rigid European model of Christianity, the Jesuits incorporated elements of Native American spirituality.
It's like they were trying to create a more blended form of religious practice.
Yeah, it shows that even in a colonial setting, there could be moments of mutual understanding and adaptation.
But those moments were often overshadowed by conflict.
Sadly, yes.
Metacom's War, also known as King Philip's War, really shook things up in New England.
Oh, yeah. Think about the tension that had been building for decades.
Decades of resentment.
Yeah, Metacom's War was fueled by frustration over land loss and the erosion of Native American autonomy.
And it led to some serious violence, right?
Absolutely. You had the destruction of Swansea, a key English settlement.
And that bloody battle at Rhode Island's Great Swamp.
Yeah, it was a devastating conflict for both sides.
And it really solidified this idea that Native Americans and Europeans were fundamentally different.
Right, like two separate races destined to be at odds.
It's like a turning point where the hope of peaceful coexistence really starts to fade.
You see figures like Neolin and Pontiac emerge, preaching this message of racial distinction.
Yeah, they were calling for resistance.
Yeah, urging Native Americans to resist European encroachment and reclaim their cultural identity.
It was a powerful message for people who felt like their way of life was slipping away.
Absolutely.
And then you have the walking purchase of 1737.
Oh, yeah.
Where the Delawares were basically tricked into giving up a huge chunk of land.
It was a manipulated agreement.
Yeah, and it really fueled this growing sense of betrayal and resentment towards the colonists.
It's like, how can you trust these people after something like that?
Exactly, and yet in the middle of all this conflict, you have individuals like Andrew Montour.
Right, a mixed-race interpreter and negotiator.
Trying to bridge the gap between these two worlds.
Montour's life is fascinating, you know.
Yeah, he was caught between two cultures.
He faced unique challenges, but also possessed a unique understanding.
Yeah, he could speak both languages.
Navigate both worlds.
He symbolizes both the connection and the conflict of that era.
Yeah, it's a powerful story.
And he was a crucial player in those tense negotiations.
Imagine being the bridge between two groups who fundamentally distrust each other.
It must have been incredibly challenging to navigate that space.
Interpreters like Montour played a vital role.
Absolutely.
But often found themselves in precarious positions.
Yeah, walking a tightrope.
They had to be careful not to appear biased to either side.
All while trying to ensure accurate communication.
It's a reminder of the human stories that often get overlooked in the grand narratives of history.
Yeah, it's so easy to focus on the big events.
Right.
But it's those individual stories that really bring the past to life.
Absolutely.
And make us realize that history is made up of real people.
With real struggles and triumphs.
Yeah, it's not just dates and battles.
It's about the choices people made and the consequences that rippled out from those choices.
And it's a reminder that those choices still matter today.
Absolutely.
They shape the world we live in.
We're all connected to the past in ways we might not even realize.
And understanding that connection can help us make better choices for the future.
I completely agree.
So yeah, there's a lot to unpack here.
There's always more to learn.
And I think this deep dive has just scratched the surface.
Just the beginning.
But it's a good starting point for understanding the complexities of Native American history.
And the importance of their stories.
Absolutely.
For all of us.
You know, it's incredible how, even when facing this immense pressure to assimilate Native Americans, never stopped fighting for their rights, their culture, their very existence.
Yeah, that's what makes this period so fascinating. You see this surge of activism in the 1960s and 70s, inspired by the civil rights movement, but also forging its own path.
Right. It's like a double movement happening at the same time. And we can't forget about the National Congress of American Indians.
Right. They've been around for a while.
Yeah, they've been working within the system. But in the 60s, you have this new generation of activists who are starting to push for more.
Yeah. They're not content with just working within the system anymore.
Right. They want to see real change.
Exactly.
And the National Indian Youth Council NIYC, formed in 1961.
Yeah.
They're a great example of this shift.
They really challenged the older generation's approach, arguing for bolder actions to create real change.
They were tired of waiting.
They were done waiting.
For the system to work for them.
Exactly.
And they weren't afraid to get in people's faces.
No, they weren't.
Think about those fish-ins they organized.
Yeah.
In the Pacific Northwest.
Challenging those unfair fishing laws.
Yeah, directly challenging them.
It took serious courage.
Absolutely.
To stand up like that.
It was a brilliant tactic, though.
Oh, incredibly effective.
They drew attention to those broken treaties.
Yeah. And the hypocrisy of those state laws that were ignoring Native American fishing rights.
And it worked.
It did.
You know, it was a form of peaceful resistance.
Right.
But it resonated with the public.
It put pressure on the government to honor their agreements.
And then in 1968, you have the American Indian movement, AIM.
Oh, yeah.
Exploding onto the scene.
They were ready to shake things up.
Yeah, they were not messing around.
No, they were serious.
They were ready to use direct action.
Even armed resistance if necessary.
To defend their rights.
It was a controversial approach for sure.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But it forced people to pay attention.
They were not going to be ignored.
No, they weren't.
And think about the occupation of Alcatraz Island in 1969.
Oh, yeah.
That was a bold statement.
It grabbed the world's attention.
It put Native American issues on the map.
Alcatraz was more than just an occupation.
It was a symbol.
A powerful symbol.
By claiming that abandoned island.
They were highlighting the broken promises.
The stolen land.
The fight for their very existence.
It was a visual reminder that Native Americans were still here.
And they weren't going away.
And they weren't just fighting for symbolic victories.
No, they were fighting for the return of their land.
For the government to honor treaties.
For an end to the policies that were trying to erase their culture.
They were demanding self-determination.
The right to control their own communities and their own future.
It was a rejection of the government's attempts to control and assimilate them.
They were saying, we are not going to be assimilated. We are going to determine our own destiny.
And they were willing to put everything on the line for their beliefs.
Absolutely.
The Wounded Knee incident of 1973.
Oh, yeah.
Where AIM took over the site of the 1890 massacre.
Such a powerful symbolic act.
It was a tense standoff.
71 days.
AIM members and federal authorities face to face.
It brought back the pain and anger of the past.
Highlighted the ongoing struggle for justice.
It was a wake-up call for America.
It forced people to acknowledge that the issues Native Americans were fighting for weren't just history.
They were happening right now.
This wasn't something in a textbook.
This was real life.
And it helped change the conversation.
Both in the public and in the government.
It created momentum for real change.
And it laid the groundwork for the self-determination policies that followed.
It's like all that activism planted the seeds for a new era.
And in the 1970s, you start to see those seeds blossom.
With laws and policies recognizing tribal sovereignty.
The Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act of 1975.
That was a turning point.
It shifted the power dynamic.
Empowering tribes to take control of their own affairs.
Education, healthcare, economic development.
It was finally acknowledging that tribes knew best how to serve their own people.
Exactly. No more of that top-down approach.
Right. It was about giving them the tools and the resources to govern themselves.
To manage their own land.
To shape their own destiny.
And that opened up a whole new world of possibilities.
Like a door swung open.
Tribes started their own businesses.
They took control of their resources.
Created economic opportunities for their communities.
It was an economic revolution.
Casinos, natural resource development, tourism.
Tribes were diversifying their economies.
Building their own success.
It was about breaking free from dependence.
And forging their own path.
And there was this renewed focus on preserving their cultures and languages.
There's a cultural rebirth.
Tribes revitalized languages.
Embraced traditional arts.
Taught their history to future generations.
It was about reclaiming their identity.
Passing on their heritage with pride.
Yeah, it's amazing to see that resurgence of pride.
But I'm guessing it wasn't all smooth sailing.
Oh, of course not. Progress is never a straight line.
There were still legal battles over land.
Disputes with states over jurisdiction.
And the ongoing struggle to overcome centuries of poverty and discrimination.
These weren't problems that could be solved overnight.
And the political winds were shifting too.
Yeah, definitely.
I remember the Reagan era being particularly tough for a lot of Native American communities.
The Reagan era was a mixed bag.
Yeah.
While he talked about supporting self-determination,
right,
His administration also slashed funding for a lot of Native American programs.
It's like one step forward, two steps back sometimes.
It was a reminder that even when you make progress, there are always forces trying to roll it back.
It's like a constant tug of war.
It is.
But through it all, Native American communities never gave up.
They adapted, they innovated, and they continued to fight for their rights.
Their resilience is truly inspiring.
They faced incredible obstacles, but they found ways to preserve their cultures,
Strengthen their community.
demand their rightful place in American society.
And that resilience is embodied in so many incredible leaders.
Oh, absolutely.
Wilma Mankiller, the first female principal chief of the Cherokee Nation.
Wilma Mankiller was a trailblazer,
She shattered glass ceilings
led with strength and compassion.
and fought tirelessly for her people,
She showed the world what Native women were capable of.
and inspired a generation of leaders.
She left an incredible legacy.
So wrapping up this part of our deep dive, it's clear that Native American history isn't just a dusty textbook story.
It's alive.
It's evolving.
It's filled with this incredible spirit of resilience and self-determination.
And that story continues to unfold today.
In the next part, we'll delve into how Native American communities are navigating the 21st century
The challenges they face.
and the incredible ways they're shaping the future.
It's amazing to think we've covered so much ground already, from those ancient civilizations before Columbus to the fight for self-determination in the 20th century.
It really makes you realize that Native American history isn't just something in the past.
It's still unfolding right now.
Yeah, and it's evolving faster than ever. In the 21st century, Native American communities are dealing with globalization technology and this growing awareness of Indigenous rights.
Like it's a whole new set of challenges and opportunities.
Yeah. It's an exciting time to be studying their history, to see how they're navigating all these changes.
And one of the things that's really powerful to see is the fight for environmental justice.
Oh, absolutely.
Native Americans are often on the front lines.
Yeah, protecting their land and water.
The Standing Rock protests against the Dakota Access Pipeline were such a powerful example of that.
Standing Rock really captured the world's attention.
It felt like a turning point.
It showed the power of collective action and the unwavering commitment of Indigenous communities to protect their sacred lands and waters.
And it brought people together from all over.
Yeah, it was a reminder that environmental justice and tribal sovereignty are deeply intertwined.
And the fight for environmental justice goes way beyond pipelines.
Oh, for sure.
There's mining deforestation, and of course the growing threat of climate change.
Which disproportionately affects Native communities.
Is a major threat to their way of life.
Climate change is an existential threat. We're seeing coastal communities dealing with rising sea levels, while others are facing severe droughts and water scarcity.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to see the impact it's having.
It's a direct attack on their cultures, their livelihoods, their very way of life.
It feels like we're at a critical moment.
There's a sense of urgency to act to protect these communities and the planet.
But there's also hope, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's hope. Native American communities are leading the charge when it comes to sustainability, renewable energy, and understanding the interconnectedness of all living things.
It's like they've been stewards of the land for centuries,
Exactly.
and they have so much wisdom to share.
Their traditional knowledge, their understanding of ecosystems, and their commitment to environmental stewardship are invaluable resources.
They have so much to teach us about living in balance with nature.
Especially at a time when we need it most.
And the fight for justice isn't limited to environmental issues.
Right.
There are so many social and economic challenges facing Native communities today.
You're right. Poverty, health disparities, lack of educational opportunities, and high rates of unemployment are persistent problems.
Yeah, it's like a cycle that's hard to break.
It's a ripple effect from centuries of oppression.
It can feel overwhelming to think about all the issues.
It's complex.
But it's important to remember that each issue is interconnected.
Yeah. Poverty can lead to poor health outcomes. Lack of education can trap people in a cycle of poverty.
It's all connected.
Native communities are working tirelessly to address these challenges.
Through economic development initiatives,
Healthcare programs,
educational reforms,
they're creating opportunities, advocating for change, and building a brighter future for their people.
and there's a growing sense of hope, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Like a recognition of their self-determination and the incredible contributions they make to our society.
It's inspiring to witness. There's a surge of interest in Native American cultures, languages, and their contributions to art, literature, science, and even politics.
It's about time people started paying attention.
People are finally starting to listen to their voices and acknowledge their crucial role in shaping our country.
And we're seeing Native Americans break down barriers and take on leadership roles in all sectors.
Oh, absolutely.
Deb Haaland, the first Native American to serve as Secretary of the Interior.
That's a huge step forward.
It's a sign of progress.
Deb Haaland's appointment is historic. Her leadership brings a unique and essential perspective to the Department of the Interior,
which has such a complex history with Native American tribes.
She's a symbol of progress and a powerful voice for her people.
And it's not just in government.
Right.
There are incredible Native American artists, activists, entrepreneurs,
leaders in all walks of life,
making a real difference.
It's so important to recognize that diversity.
From fashion designers to musicians to scientists,
Native Americans are making their mark in every field imaginable.
They're sharing their stories,
challenging stereotypes,
enriching our society in countless ways.
And it's just the beginning.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that Native American history is a living, breathing tapestry.
Woven with struggle, resilience, adaptation, and this unwavering pursuit of justice and self-determination.
It's a story that continues to unfold right before our eyes.
And as we move forward, it's crucial that we listen to Native American voices, support their efforts to protect their cultures and lands, and work together to create a more just and equitable future for all.
It's been an eye-opening journey. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Native American history.
We encourage you to continue exploring this rich and complex story.
And to remember that it's not just about the past.
It's about the present and the future we're building together.